thousands, in the millions, and we will be. Because it starts right here.
Guilty! The truth never dies! The truth never dies! Come on!
Hey everyone, and welcome to the 4th episode of Naptown People's Radio, a new podcast brought to you by PSL Indianapolis. I'm your host, Derek Ford, and as always, I'm here with my co-host,
Dani Abdullah.
We're a month in now, and we want to thank our listeners, supporters, and our guests, as well as our comrades. Although we host the podcast, we are not the podcast. It wouldn't be possible without our producer, Dakota Fronterhouse, our financial donors and sustainers, and of course, our comrades in the branch and our partners in the Indianapolis Liberation Center, all of whom are deeply involved in the pressing issues we're addressing today and every week. That's why at Naptown People's Radio, we say we're not just reporting the news, we're making it happen.
So we're recording this on July 1st, and the nationwide stick-out in support of immigrant rights is happening. So on this episode, we're going to be talking about the immigration struggle that is taking off in Indiana, but also just around the country in general. And later, we're going to be hearing from Comrade Shaka A. Shakur. This week's segment of Dispatches from Behind the Wire is about the Interstate Corrections Compact, which basically deprives our people behind bars of any due process and allows the state to kidnap them without notice and transfer them anywhere in the country and potentially even out of the country. So there are clear parallels between this and the attacks on immigrants, which we will delve into with organizer Stephen Lane, who many listeners will recognize from the Indianapolis Public Library struggle, as well as his research on the drag scene here in Indy during the 1930s. And Stephen will be joining us right after the immigration potluck at Belmont Beach, and he will be informing us how we can melt ice and make our communities truly safe. But before we get into that, let's spill the tea in the Naptown Breakdown. So Derek, what you got for us today?
We got a couple of pressing issues to address today, but I have to say that the most troubling to me is the ongoing refusal of the local Democratic Party establishment to do absolutely anything to address the rampant sexism within the Hogsett administration or Councilor Samuel Osili's complicity in it, and more. Not only that, but recently, out in the open, they showed us exactly the kind of party they are and exactly the kind of misogynistic actions they endorse. I'm speaking about Democratic City County Council member Crista Carlino. On June 17th, she became the 4th member of the council to call for Hogsett's resignation. It was a brave act, and she called for a total change in leadership, saying Osili should resign along with Council VP Allie Brown because Osili unnecessarily limited the scope of the investigation to protect Hogsett. In response, Carlino's fellow party members in the council voted to expel her from the caucus the next week. They claimed she needed to produce proof Osili limited the parameters of the investigation. They could find that proof themselves. It's in the report if you read it. Now, at the time, only 2 Democrats said they'd be open to letting her back into the caucus. And for those who don't know, when you're kicked out of the caucus, you're basically kicked out of all real decision-making processes. And it's important to note that Carlino is the only female counselor to call for Hogsett's resignation. That's what makes what follows all the more troubling, because in effect, they publicly humiliated a woman, showing their true colors once again. So Carlino was told that if she made a public apology, she could be let back into the caucus. So on June 24th, she did just that. She issued a written public apology, and I want to read just one portion of it. Quote, "To the president, a leader I've always respected and supported, and to our vice president, a survivor and fighter that is known for standing tall in the face of adversity, I apologize for the extreme accountability I called for in such a public way without you there to discuss or defend your leadership and actions. I'm sorry for not affording you the chance to address my concerns as individuals. While the treatment of survivors in the June full council meeting was deeply disturbing, and the basis of the grounds for my calls for stepping down, it has been misconstrued that the 2 of them personally and directly impacted the investigation, for which I have no claim or proof." She goes on to say, "No one deserves that, and I'm sincerely sorry," end quote. So they force her to issue this apology to let her back into the caucus. And she confirmed that she's stepping down from all committee assignments. So in other words, she was let back into the caucus, but then she said, I'm going to step down from all of my responsibilities. Now, we believe our listeners have the critical faculty to judge this for themselves, but personally, I think it's absolutely clear that stepping down from all committees was not her decision. They basically forced her to publicly apologize, bow down to Hogsett and to Osili and to Brown, with a promise that she would be let back into the caucus. And when they let her back into the caucus, they removed her of all power within that caucus. This just gives us a show of how they treat women. This is, in my view, another instance of sexual harassment, right? Humiliating publicly a woman for speaking up and standing up for the truth. Now, another question is, where are the Republicans in all this? Only one Republican has called for Hogsett's resignation. So you would think that given like that the Democrats are, the Republicans' main rivals locally, that they would be doing everything they can to exploit this controversy. So why aren't they? Why wouldn't you do that? Because if you do, a spotlight is going to be shined on your own party. And they have many skeletons in the closet. They would uncover the same patterns of behavior that we found in the Democratic Party. So that's why we in the PSL have no hesitation in speaking the truth on this matter, because our party doesn't tolerate any of this nonsense. Now, we practice restorative justice and believe in allowing people to right their wrongs, but none of this would fly in our party. And now attention is already shifting to the 2027 mayoral campaign. And folks, let me tell you, the options are not looking good, at least for the Democrats. A June 25th Indy Star headline reads, quote, "The Indianapolis 2027 mayoral race has already started as Hogsett's grip fades," end quote. So first, the fact that Hogsett is continuing to fundraise for a fourth election campaign and term is beyond words. He wouldn't be doing so if he didn't have the support within the upper echelons of the party and the city's ruling class. So the Indy Star article reads, quote, "Local political observers say that the prospect of Hogsett running again has substantially dimmed due to the fallout over the harassment allegations," end quote. Now, we would note that these are not just allegations, they're confirmed incidents. And there are likely many more that could be confirmed if the scope of the investigation wasn't so narrow. Second, the other potential candidates are Prosecutor Ryan Mears and Samuel Osili.
No way, bro. No way.
Yeah. So let's get into that. Well, one, just for those who weren't able to listen last week, VOP Osili is the name you might know him by, but VOP stands for Voice of the People, and he is definitely not. So that's why he goes by Samuel Osili on this show. Now, I don't really need to say anything more about Osili, but let's talk about Mears. For almost a year, Mears' office has been harassing a black female veteran, Jada Trainor, who was assaulted by 3 officers at Eskenazi Hospital. And this happened last June when she went to the hospital because she had high blood pressure. She went with her husband, Jonathan Trainor, and her blood pressure was so high they were concerned about, an impending stroke. The staff wasn't really concerned. Eventually, Jonathan had to leave to take care of their children and their newborn in particular. So she was alone. And after waiting for a couple of hours, she went up to the nurse and asked to be seen. And, she was met with basically like a dismissal. And as Jada said to me in an interview, right, quote, "Me being upset seemed to be the most upsetting thing to them," end quote. And so Jada called her husband. She got a bad feeling as a black woman, right? She asked for an advocate, and she was told that she needed to go. She said, what did I do, right? Well, you're being rude, which is not a reason to be kicked out of a hospital. So she tried reasoning with them, and eventually they said, you know what, we're going to call security. And almost immediately, 3 uniformed cops descended on her, Anthony Sisko, Matthew Mottram, and Lighton Schoolcraft. These guys were big. They jumped on her. They threw her on the ground. Her glasses were, broken off her face. They were, assaulting her. And of course, they're saying that she's trying to reach for, a weapon out of a holster, right? It's total BS. There's absolutely no grounds. There's no evidence, and we actually filed a public records request for video footage of the incident, and we were told there was none. However, recently some of that footage has magically appeared. And then instead of treating her, they sent her to jail for 26 hours, where she was in a room that was lit the entire time. She was forced to nurse herself while a security camera watched, and she was denied her medications. And instead of prosecuting the cops who assaulted her, Ryan Mears has for a year now prolonged this and harassed this woman, right, a black woman, by prolonging a drawn-out court case. And the reason it keeps being prolonged is because the state has absolutely no evidence against her, right? Or I guess the county has no evidence against her. So if you go to IndyLiberationCenter.org, you can see that we are asking Prosecutor Mears to drop all charges against Jada Trainor. But it really goes to show you exactly who he is, and who he is no different than who Hogsett is, who Osili is, who Allie Brown is, who the entire Democratic Party establishment protects, represents, and what they're about.
As a woman, as a black woman in particular, the propaganda that is put on us about how the Democratic Party cares about women, and then to hear this like laundry list and ongoing allegations against the party is just like, I hope it's eye-opening for people. I hope it's eye-opening for people who are listening to this, who are watching the news. Just, the Democratic Party does not care about women. I personally have breastfed, and I remember falling asleep and waking up like 8 hours later and was like, oh my God, I'm in so much pain. So I can't imagine going 26 hours without being able to breastfeed, and the pain that she must have been in, and having to, express or nurse herself, on top of having high blood pressure, on top of being assaulted, on top of being in prison and not knowing what is going on, because she wasn't able to talk to her husband either as she was in there. They wouldn't allow her to talk to her husband.
Yeah, she couldn't make a phone call.
Right. Which I'm pretty sure is illegal. And not that it matters, but like, I have a very soft voice. Jada has a very soft voice. I can't even imagine Jada raising her voice to the point that this was warranted. Even if she was raising her voice, this is not warranted. There is absolutely no reason for you to have assaulted this woman who is trying to not die, right? She is trying to actively take care of herself and then is assaulted for that. As a social worker, and as a social worker who used to work at Eskenazi and used to work in the hospital, when I heard this story, I was not surprised.
Yeah.
There is a reason I don't work in a hospital setting anymore. There's a reason I don't work at Eskenazi anymore. And it was because of incidents like this. This is not even the first time that the Librarians Center has heard of security, the police, whatever. They are assaulting people who come in there for help and being assaulted and being having a criminal record because they thought, okay, this is Eskenazi, this is the county hospital, this is where I can go to get help, and they end up being harmed further.
And the fact that, like, this is what you choose, like, this is on your agenda of, like, your quote-unquote crimes to prosecute, people to go after, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that tells you really everything about Mears' agenda,
Absolutely.
I think. You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, think about, like, there's no grand jury being called, right? Like, if like they do with the cops to protect them, right. They just charged her. And right. They've been dragging this out. They've requested, I think, 2 continuances. They've been granted both. And that's obviously an attempt to wear them down,
Absolutely.
Because, at some point, like, the trauma, you just want to get it over with, right? Yeah. And they'll offer you a plea bargain, and it's like, all right, let's just take it,
Yeah.
But, when I spoke to them, they were like, if anything, this is making us more resolute, in our determination and our steadfastness to fight this, So if anything, I would say Jada Trainor should be mayor.
Oh, yeah. Jada would be a great mayor, actually. She's very just. She's a veteran. She's amazing. She's a parent. She's a mother of 5 children, I believe. Yeah, no. Jada Trainor for mayor. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm down.
Yeah.
As far as Carlino goes, I remember seeing the article when it came out on my birthday, when she first was like, Hogsett needs to resign. I was like, hell yeah. All right. Like, we got somebody else doing it, and also it's a woman. And then days later, seeing what they did to her and seeing they made her apologize to Osili, of all people. And just like, I can't imagine the humiliation of like, gearing herself up to do this very brave thing that she did, and then being told like, not only can you not do that, but if you don't apologize, we're going to strip you of everything you have worked hard for. And then to apologize and still being stripped of everything she has worked hard for is ridiculous. To still have conversations with people and think, you really think that Democrats are for you? It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. And I feel so bad for her. I feel so bad for her every time I think about it.
And I mean, I will just say this is the 4th episode and maybe the 2nd that Dani has mentioned her birthday. But, moving on.
I'm sorry that, like, I blessed you with my life. Like, actually, I made your life better.
That is
We should always
true.
talk about my birthday.
That is 100% true. And all of our listeners, and I'm sure Dani is still accepting presents. You can just send them to the Liberation Center.
Here we go.
But yeah, no, I do. And it's, and again, when we talk about the Democratic Party, we're not talking about, people who are registered as Democrats, right? We're talking about the real institution, the
Absolutely.
people who really call the shots. Most of the people who become socialists were at one point Democrats, right? And then they go through the experience of being this party and being like, wait a second, they say they're lesser of 2 evils, but like, what does that mean when they're both committing genocide against Palestinians? What does that mean when they're both treating women like this? Can you really have a lesser of 2 evil when it comes to sexual assault? Like, I'm not choosing between like that. That's not a real choice. I think that what we have to do is just present to the people like there is an alternative. And that's why, like, we say Jada Trainor for mayor, we're actually being serious because she has the capacity. Everyday people have the capacity to govern this city because we govern our own lives. We govern our own families. We govern our own neighborhoods. Like, there's this idea that you have to have some specialized degree and you have to be some have some pedigree and grow up in some certain family, to like be able to govern the city. But like what we talked about before with Ryan Mears, like all he does is hide from the people. Like he doesn't do anything. So these politicians basically don't do anything except get themselves into controversies and then try to cover their asses and then shift the blame so that they can advance their careers.
And you touched on this, but the part about like, when Mears is working, when he's doing the bidding of the police, right? He is constantly like, we need a grand jury. We can't just go to trial. But right, for Jada, you just press charges, right? Why do you not have that same energy when it comes to the cop who killed Gary Harrell, when it comes to the Taylor family, when it comes to all of these victims of IMPD violence? Why do you not have that same energy? But when it comes to the people, who have, voted you into office, you want to prosecute us.
I know some people don't like this, but I will say to ask the question is to answer it.
That was very Professor Ford of you. Oh, man. Okay. We'll take a short break and we'll be back with Stephen Lane from the Party for Socialism and Liberation. You're listening to Naptown People's Radio, coming to you from our studio at the Indianapolis Liberation Center.
They attacked the victim, and then the criminal who attacked the victim accuses the victim of attacking him. This is American justice. This is American democracy. And those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy. Now, if I'm wrong, put me in jail. But if you can't prove that a democracy is not hypocrisy, then don't put your hands on me.
And we're back on Naptown People's Radio with Stephen Lane, a organizer with PSL Indianapolis, a Hallville resident, a third-generation Hoosier, who's the outreach coordinator of the Indianapolis Liberation Center, as well as the treasurer of our member organization, the Indiana Black Librarians Network. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Hey, y'all. Thank you for having me.
So today is the National Sick Out Day in solidarity with immigrant rights. Can you talk to us about what exactly the Sick Out Day is, how it came about, and what you did for it today?
Yeah, so National Sick Out Day was called by a lot of immigrant rights groups across the country to raise awareness around immigration and the illegal ICE raids currently undertaken by Trump and Braun. And the whole point of the day is to call out sick from work, which we did, a number of us did, and support immigrant businesses or, just spend the day. What we did was we spent the day at Belmont Beach in Hallville, in my neighborhood, to just bring the community together and talk about different issues around immigration and how we are going to keep each other safe during these ICE raids and this increased attack on immigrants. And we just spent the day in community with each other, and it was just a lot of fun, and it was just a great time to spend with the neighborhood and with my community.
I wanted to touch on, because you said that the Sick Out Day took place at Belmont Beach, which is, Hallville is a very mixed neighborhood, right? There's a lot of Black people, a lot of brown people, a lot of immigrants in that neighborhood. And when we're talking about the attack on immigrants, I think a lot of people, for some strange reason, the media likes to act like there are no Black immigrants, but the media has also tried to cause a divide between Black Americans and immigrants. And to have the Sick Out Day in Hallville, I would imagine was very purposeful. But can you speak on the attempt at the divide between Black people and brown immigrants?
Yeah, certainly. So a lot of different groups across the country are doing different types of actions. So some cities are doing rallies. Some people are doing sit-ins or, those kinds of protests. Today's action was all about, in Hallville specifically, was all about bringing people together. We are a neighborhood that is primarily Black and Latino, all living together in the same neighborhood, 8,000 residents. And the neighborhood historically was built and started by immigrants from Eastern Europeans and things like that. And the most recent attempt by IMPD was to really tie the graffiti that is going up around the neighborhood. Some of it is like gang tags, some of it is like friends, talking about free my friend. And the IMPD at one of our most recent neighborhood meetings really tried to say that there's a rise in immigrant gang activity in the neighborhood to really try to drive a wedge between immigrant neighbors and the Black residents. And I really feel like they try to do that to, like that same tactic of divide and conquer, so that they can easily come into Hallville and conduct these ICE raids and think that there would be very little resistance to them. So we decided not to do a rally this time, but to do a picnic at Belmont Beach, where it's a very central location in the neighborhood that is easily accessible. And people just came out to talk about, we read an article discussing the most recent case where Trump is deporting people to other countries other than their country of origin. So they don't even get to like go back to their home country. If they are deported, they can be deported anywhere in the world without legal protections or legal documents. And a lot of times they're deported to places like El Salvador, which has the CCOT, or Djibouti, which also has like a detention center on a U.S. military base. So we were discussing this article and just talking about different ways that we can come together as a community, as a neighborhood, to keep our immigrant neighbors safe. And it was really great to see like a diverse group of people. Actually, there weren't any immigrants at the event today. And I think because there's so much fear that's been stoked up in the media, the corporate media, by Trump, by Braun, and by the IMPD, that's all complicit, all working together to go after our immigrant neighbors. So it was just a lot of community residents that were concerned and wanted to do something about it. And coming together is just one way that we can start planning out our next steps of how we're going to resist these ICE raids.
And if I could just say, I mean, it was so absurd when they try to say that like Mexican gangs were infiltrating Hawville and, like tagging the neighborhood to claim their territory. Like, where did these gangs come from? All of a sudden they just like pop up randomly. Like nobody's ever heard about them. Like this hasn't been an issue before. And all of a sudden they're just like, oh yeah, no, these are immigrant like gangs, right? Like terrorizing the neighborhood or something like that. And I just remember like thinking like, this is incredible. Like, how could you believe this, right? I mean, did anybody at the like neighborhood, association meeting like really buy that? And did you have to agitate against it or what?
Good question. Yeah, so I'm a librarian, so I like to deal with information that is comes from credible sources. So I definitely raised my hand in that neighborhood meeting, and I was like, what evidence do you have besides the tags? Because anybody with an internet connection could go online and find MS-13 gang tags and put that up anywhere. And they were just like, well, we don't have any like direct evidence other than that the tags are going up, which means that they're marking their territory. And then I had a neighbor who is an immigrant from Indonesia, and she got up and was just like, this is wrong. Like, we can't just go after a whole group of people just because you think that there's an increase in gang activity when there's no evidence. There's no news articles coming out about increased gang activity. There's no white papers. There's nothing other than these tags. And she was really talking about her story of immigration to the States, where she talked about how before she had her green card, her son would wake up every night crying, scared that his mother was going to be deported in the middle of the night. And he would climb in bed with her and she would comfort him and things like that. And so this neighbor really kind of took what the police were trying to say and humanized herself as an immigrant neighbor resident in Hawville. And that really changed the conversation to like, okay, what can we do as a neighborhood to make sure that everybody feels safe? There is no evidence of these tags, so, we're going to move on to talk about like Know Your Rights campaigns. At that time, Know Your Rights was really being pushed across the country, and I think we're beyond that point now. But we were really coming together in that neighborhood meeting to say, we're going to support our immigrant neighbors. We're going to support everybody that calls Hawville home. We're going to find a way to support them.
And that's amazing. I appreciate all the work that y'all are doing in Hawville, and just that neighborhood in general, like, really comes together all the time for one another, and it's a beautiful thing. And the way that Hawville has been kind of demonized. We were just talking about Osili earlier, who is Your
worst.
city county councilor. Isn't that right, Stephen?
That's correct. Unfortunately,
Is he with the M13 or what's it?
He might actually be in a gang the way they're like consolidating around Hogsett.
They
sexual
are the
harassment.
Yeah,
gang,
that's a real
actually.
gang.
That is the real gang. Like, them and IMPD are just merging more and more. Yeah, that is the real gang, actually. You mentioned that know your rights is not necessarily like a thing that needs to happen right now, and you also mentioned like how not a lot of immigrants actually came out to the action today, the picnic today. And I know those who were organizing mentioned that may happen, right? Especially with ICE ramping up more and more. And they're not just going to people's homes, right? Because people know their rights and they know not to open the door when ICE comes. So instead, they're getting them at the grocery store and they're getting them when they go to work. And so it totally makes sense that immigrants are not coming out to a picnic for fear of their lives, right? And fear of their loved ones' lives. And so I'm wondering with that, like, what are some ways that in Hallville in particular, because again, Hallville is just so, honestly, Hallville is so organized, like the way that y'all come together for one another. What are some ways that y'all have been able to kind of combat what the police are saying about the neighborhood, as well as how to just be there in support of one another?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that fear that's being stoked right now by our government and by the corporate media is really just meant to keep everyone afraid. But historically, what we've seen, especially in 2006, with the mass rallies across the country, even here in Indianapolis, there were like really mass rallies of immigrants coming out, undocumented immigrants, who overcame that fear to push for DACA and were able to get that through struggle. And I think we're in a time where that fear is there and it's very real, and it's our duty as full citizens, as a third generation resident of Indianapolis. I feel that it is part of my job to empower my immigrant neighbors and even my other neighbors to intervene in some way and say that, we got to empower ourselves to get over that fear or use that fear to turn it into action, because they're going to come for us anyway. They're coming for us, whether you're at home, whether you're at work, whether you're in school, in church, the grocery store, like you were saying. So we're in a moment where we have to find ways to empower our neighbors in our communities to intervene if they see those ICE raids happen, because they happen very quickly. They happen pretty much within 5 minutes. The whole thing is said and done if nobody's out there. And I think we got to get to the point where if we see ICE pull up to somebody's house or somebody's job or school, we're getting our other neighbors out. We're knocking on doors like, hey, we got to get out here. We got to intervene in some way. Like we've seen in other places, like in Los Angeles, like those kind of interventions of just making ICE feel unwelcome in our communities and in our neighborhoods and our jobs, I think has made a really powerful impact in like slowing the deportations and the ICE raids down.
Absolutely. I think it was in LA where protesters, they went outside of a hotel and they just blasted music at the hotel that they knew that ICE was inside, just to convince the people who were running the hotel, like, hey, get them out of here, or you're gonna keep having these noise disturbances, right? People are getting so creative when it comes to getting ICE out of our neighborhoods. You mentioned 2006. What do you feel like is the difference and maybe even the similarities between 2025 and the immigration struggle of the early 2000s?
That's a really good question. I feel like in 2006, those mass rallies were primarily immigrant-led, Whereas now we're getting, especially here in Indianapolis, a lot of the rallies include immigrants, but it's a very diverse grouping of people who come out in support of immigrant rights, which I think is really speaks to the times. And I think that is just like a carryover from the uprisings in 2020, and that people are realizing that it's, in order to change things, it's going to take all of us, not just these individual groups fighting on their own. In order to overcome homophobia, police brutality, racism, we need a diverse grouping of workers out there fighting for all of our rights, right?
Absolutely.
And I mean, the other thing is that, in 2006, I mean, first, it took another 6 years for, the government to pass DACA, right? So it's not as if there was like an immediate, response, right? But the other thing is that, DACA, right, it's undocumented and unafraid, right? In other words, and so I think that there's been this fear that, it's justifiable, of course, right? But when we are together, that's what real security and safety is. Like when we were out, outside Gamebridge Fieldhouse, right? Like the cops wanted to, but could not mess with us because of our sheer numbers and like the sheer diversity. And that was, there were immigrant organizations, at the head of that, as well as like the PSL and other groups. And there was very multinational. And, the influence, I think, of youth in particular in 2006 really changed the equation. I mean, that's also when May Day came back, they had the general strike, all across the country, Day Without Immigrants. And, that really showed the power they have is at production. You know what I mean? Like without immigrants, like nothing runs. Just like without workers, nothing runs. And so who should run this city? Immigrants and workers. And so we have to really get to that level of consciousness and that level of, struggle, which, isn't going to happen overnight. But I think it happens. There's also been the NGOization of a lot of these organizations, right? I mean, 2006, these were like spontaneous, militant rallies led by faith groups, as well as, radical groupings of young students. And then now they kind of been absorbed in some sense, like Black Lives Matter into the, Democratic Party apparatus. And so I think breaking from that, is going to be necessary because they want you to be afraid. They want us to be afraid. And, it's understandable for people to be afraid. We don't discount their feelings. But, there's this idea that, well, what keeps you safe? You know what I mean? Like hiding doesn't keep you safe from ICE. That actually makes you more vulnerable to ICE. And so I always go back to the undocumented, unafraid, like this whole idea of like, oh, we got to, wear masks because, or else like they're going to know that I'm here, right? It's like, well, like how are we going to build a movement if people don't know who we are? Why are they going to trust your leadership? Who are you going to follow? Like somebody with a mask who you never met, or somebody whose like face you recognize because they've been in the struggle and in many struggles, for your entire time in Indianapolis. And so I think that, those are also some important differences that are lessons that we can learn as we continue building the struggle here.
Yeah, I love that. I think masks are for the ICE agents. Like, they're the ones that should be scared to show their faces in public, and we need to expose who these people are. But like you said, Derek, I was so empowered when I saw those pictures of Jaime Pasillas at the Gamebridge Fieldhouse rallies, because he has so much to lose right now, and he has like a lot of negative attention on him and his case, right? But he came out to that rally, and just seeing those pictures of him, he had his fists in the air. You could see he was chanting. It was just very empowering. Like, and you could see that, yeah, he faces deportation, even though he's lived here his whole life. Faces deportation to go back to be sent to Mexico. And he came out and was just like, look, I have nothing to lose. I have nothing to fear. And he really demonstrated what it's going to take for us to overcome these ICE raids.
That's right. And that seems to be a lesson of history, like, or a rule of history. It's those with the least to lose, like that are at the forefront, I mean, that's why, as we were talking about the last episode, the slaves freed themselves. right? It wasn't like those who like rich white do-gooders in the North who did it. They had a lot to lose, you know what I mean? Like they played a part in it, but they weren't at the forefront of it. It's always the most oppressed that are at the front lines of the struggle.
So given the struggle, given the fear, valid fear, right? We have validated people's fear, and it makes sense why people are in fear. But like, there is so much to be done, right? And not just with immigration, but with everything, right? All of our struggles are connected. Can you tell listeners what are some ways that they can get more involved?
Yeah, you can get more involved in the struggle by joining different organizations doing the work, like Indiana Aid. They provide assistance to immigrants who are detained, either in regular prisons or in ICE detention. And they just do incredible work, just like translating documents and communicating with their families on the outside. Also, there is a rapid response network being built here in Indianapolis. So if you want to be a part of that, I think you should sign up for the PSL newsletter to keep updated of when that will launch, because we will be announcing that for sure.
I appreciate you coming in, Stephen. Anything else that you feel like is pertinent for listeners to know or to think about listening to this interview?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all for the opportunity to discuss what's going on with ICE in Indianapolis and how we plan on keeping our immigrants safe. Definitely join the struggle if you see a rally for immigrant rights and immigrant liberation. Come out, bring your friends, bring your family. It's all hands on deck at this point, and be looking out for that rapid response network.
Dope. Okay, well, we appreciate you, Stephen. Thank you so much. I was excited to have Stephen because if it wasn't for Stephen Lane, there would be no Dani Abdullah in the Party for Socialism and Liberation. So I'm always excited to show off my comrade. So thank you so much. We are going to take a short break and we'll be back.
I think it comes as news to a great many of my co-citizens that the reason that black people are in the streets has to do with the lives they're forced to lead in this country. And they're forced to lead these lives by the indifference and the apathy and a certain kind of ignorance, a very willful ignorance.
And welcome back to Naptown People's Radio. We are here with Shaka A. Shakur for his regular segment, Dispatches from Behind the Wire. Shaka A. Shakur is a comrade and a crucial member of the Indianapolis Liberation Center, a new African independence movement theorist, organizer, political prisoner. And today, Shaka, I believe we're going to be talking about the Interstate Compact. Is that right?
That is correct.
All right. So, yeah, what is that? Because until we had met, I wasn't familiar with it.
Yeah, the Interstate Compact, officially it's called the Interstate Corrections Compact. And what it is an agreement between states where they enter into a contract to send and receive or swap prisoners from their particular state. So, it's like an example for the case in Indiana. Indiana has contracts that I know of with Virginia, with Arizona, Oklahoma, Alaska, I think New Mexico, and a few other states, where they send prisoners from their state to those states, and they pay for those prisoners to be housed in that state, cover their medical bills, etc. And in return, sometimes they receive prisoners from the state that they send people to. And in the case of the prisoner, he basically has no rights. He's not given any type of due process hearing. He, up until 3 years, I was sent out of state in December 2018 to the state of the Commonwealth of Virginia, I wasn't allowed a hearing. I was just asked to sign a classification paper form on the way out the door, which I refused to sign. And until, we kept pressing about it. After 3 years, I was allowed to file a classification appeal challenging the decision, which was really just perfunctory. There's no real review, there's no real evaluation, and you just receive a notice in the mail saying appeal denied. You were appropriately placed. And just to add on to that, and the Supreme Court has ruled that an inmate or prisoner has no reasonable expectation to be housed in his state of conviction. So in other words, whatever state you was convicted in, you had no right to believe or accept or whatnot to be housed in that state. So I could be sent to the islands, I could be sent to Central America, South America, I could be sent out of the country.
The very phrasing of that reminds me of the Dred Scott decision, right? The black man has no rights, the white man is bound to respect.
Absolutely, and it's really the product of the birth of the Fugitive Slave Act, really. Because just like under the Fugitive Slave Act, if you ran off the plantation or you escaped from the plantation to another territory, another state or whatnot, under the Fugitive Slave Act, they had a right to hunt you down, track you down, and bring you back to whatever state you fled from. So it's really sort of similar, but also it's been weaponized in the sense that the states and the powers that be of those states use it as a tool and method of counterinsurgency. You know what I'm saying? They use it as a control mechanism to undermine political movements and to neutralize or isolate political prisoners, prison activists, and jailhouse lawyers, or any prisoners that's particularly influential that doesn't support the status quo. So generally, those are the targets of this particular contract, and we're sent from our home base, away from our families, to other territories, sent away from our support system and support structure and what have you, to undermine our effectiveness or our ability to challenge conditions of confinement or human rights violations, or to even work on our cases and be politically active.
Yeah, and it also poses so many difficulties just personally. I mean, I know that your wife was recently spent, quite a good deal of money to go visit you, and I think how many hours were you able to actually see her? That's what's so ironic, man. Like, it's no uniformity. Like here at Buckingham Correctional Center where I'm at now, and my wife is only able to make it out here to visit me maybe once a year. And that costs us anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 for, a flight, car rental, hotel, etc., and other expenses. And my wife is up in age a little bit, so it's a hardship. And so we were approved for 2 days of visit, June 20th to the 21st. And we were only allowed 1 day, and then it's only for 2 hours. We only allowed a 2-hour extended visit. Because we went on lockdown days before, or several days before, and when the weekend came around, we were going to modify our lockdown. Even though I had already been approved, the visit was canceled because they wasn't allowing face-to-face visits until the following week. Although the reason that we went on lockdown was technically an isolated incident, So it just, and then had other facilities I've been at, in other institutions, we would have been allowed an all-day visit, long as the visiting room wasn't crowded. And we would have been allowed a minimum of 4 hours visit, et cetera. So it's just like a certain degree of indifference, like no compassion, no consideration. The same way when here I had to fight for an attorney visit. I got an attorney that's coming from D.C. to Virginia and other out-of-state attorneys, and you want to restrict us to a 2-hour visit. Again, arbitrary, where that's not the policy. And other spots, other locations, other facilities I've been at, again, there's not an issue with time restraints or time limitations on attorney visits.
You know, so there's a lack of uniformity, you know, and a lack of uniformity or mandate coming down from the DOC headquarters.
Yeah, and it seems like it's not applied evenly across prisoners or inmates.
Yeah, and just in terms of, like I said, just in terms of, you know, we're not asked to be coddled. We're not asking no favors. There'll be no favoritism with them. We just asking for a little bit of courtesy and a little bit of consideration. If somebody's coming from, say, Indiana to Virginia, or DC for Virginia, or California for Virginia, you know what I'm saying, for a special visit, whatnot, surely we should be allowed more than a 2-hour visit.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with the lawyer. I mean, that's like, it really goes to show you that all this talk about, you know, the law and order and constitution, it really means nothing. It's just talk.
Yeah, we should not be made to have to go through headquarters, DOC headquarters, to get approved or have them tell the facility to give us extra time. You know, and there's no thing being factored in for us, you know, if a wrong turn is made or something happened where the lawyer don't make it here in time, you know, for the scheduled appointment. You know, he's a half hour late, or he's an hour late. You know, the clock is still ticking, so we still would only get an hour visit unless we went beyond the reach of the facility and went to DOC headquarters to get it approved.
Yeah.
For those that might be interested in the law on this issue, for Virginia, the statute is 53.1-216, Interstate Corrections Compact, Chapter 9, Interstate Corrections Compact, or you can look under Title 53-1, Prisons and Other Methods of Virginia. That's the code for Virginia. And the actual Department of Corrections policy is Operating Procedure 020.1.
Okay. That's good to know, and we'll definitely include that in the show notes underneath this episode, because my feeling is that most people will be outraged at just the lack of, you know, I mean, like, dignity that they afford you. I mean, it's just an insult to all of us, you know.
And in Indiana's case, all right, bro, thank you. In Indiana's case, there's a. It's indefinite. There's no set timetable as to when you can come back to your home state from the state that you've been sent to. Now, in some other states, like I think Minnesota, for example, you can come back after 5 years if you've not been in any type of trouble or anything of that nature. Hold on a second. Yeah, if you've not been in any type of trouble or what have you in 5 years, you can petition to return to your state. In Indiana, it appears to be indefinite. In my case, I was told that I'm not allowed to come back, and if I push to come back and they're forced to bring me back, I'll be locked back down in solitary confinement in the supermax or the SHU, as opposed to being automatically released into the general population. And here it is. I've been in Virginia almost 7 years almost, and I've completed numerous programs. I'm taking trades. I completed college courses. I've not had any major trouble, etc. You know, in contrast to something that in 30 years of doing time, I've not been allowed to do in Indiana. In terms of trades and programs, etc. And yet, I'm doing good for the most part, and yet you're telling me that if I return to Indiana, you're going to return me back to solitary confinement. And this is solely based upon my political views, my political activities, my organizing capabilities, and just respect and influence amongst prisoners. You know, so it's retaliatory.
Yeah. And for those, you know, who are listening, go to shakashakur.org and you can see the wall of accomplishments and see just, you know, exactly how Shaka has taken advantage of every single opportunity to, you know, so-called, you know, reform himself, right? And it really just goes to show that it is political, and we salute you for not stopping your political activity despite, you know, being sent into exile.
The terrain might change, but the impression remains the same, and so does the struggle, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, and a lot of times it's a hidden agenda behind these transfers a lot of times. And the hidden agenda behind a lot of sometimes these transfers is to neutralize us on more than just the political level. Sometimes we are put in situations and predicaments where we are forced to engage in activities where we might pick up more time, might pick up a new case, might be harmed, etc. There's been instances where, you know, people have had their files falsified, their records are falsified, and those records released to other organizations or groups within the population that might be hostile to those views or whatnot in an attempt to set you up for harm, you know. So, yeah, it's a lot of components to it, man, you know. So you have to, like, really examine, you know, what's behind the whole move and the agenda itself, right?
For sure.
And again, that just shows, too, that these people have too much power that's unchecked, you know, too much power that's unchecked without any types of checks and balances. You know, and there should be some type of regulation or something put in place that's not arbitrary, and some type of criteria put in place for these people be forced to go by and can be governed by, as opposed to just exiling us out of the state or out of the country for an indefinite period of time, especially when it's definitely unjustified.
Yeah,
right
absolutely.
now we have no rights.
And those are reforms that we're going to push for as we continue to fight to free them all, to free all political prisoners, prisoners of war, free Shaka A. Shakur. And again, to support Shaka and the Freedom Campaign, please go to shakashakur.org and you can find several ways you can help him right now. Well, that's it for another segment of Dispatches from Behind the Wire with Shaka A. Shakur. You're listening to Naptown People's Radio, and we'll be right back.
I'm saying it's a struggle, and I think everybody deserves it. And I think there's a way to pay these people. I think there is a way. It just takes to be revolutionary, and it takes to do something out of the ordinary.
And we're back on Naptown People's Radio. I hope you found the discussion with Stephen Lane and Shaka A. Shakur informative, and that you were able to maybe make some of the connections between the two issues that Dani mentioned at the beginning of the episode. We're, of course, happy to revisit those at the next episode, so please do contact us if you're searching for more. And before we wrap up today, we need to do the Circle City shout-out. So, Dani, what you got for us today?
So today's Circle City shout-out goes to Justin Huerta, a.k.a. Jack, a.k.a. the King Trill. As a founding member of the Indie Liberation Center, an immigrant, and a formerly incarcerated individual, Jack has worked hard to be a support to other formerly incarcerated people and is the director for Focus Initiatives, a reentry program for incarcerated individuals returning home. It's a support system to aid in dropping the recidivism rates, or in other words, to prevent them from returning to the justice system. It was through his work with incarcerated individuals that Jack became a member of the Defense Committee for the Pendleton 2 and later directed the documentary The Pendleton 2, They Stood Up, to expose Indiana's very own Pendleton Penitentiary's dehumanizing conditions, specifically in the case of the Pendleton 2. If you're not familiar with the Pendleton 2 or the Defense Committee to free the Pendleton 2, don't worry. I was unaware of the atrocities coming out of Pendleton before I met Jock and 2 Black and watched their amazing documentary. So back in the 80s and beyond, and also, like, let's be real, probably today, men of color in Pendleton were victimized by a splinter group of the KKK known as the Sons of Light, which is like a whack name, but anyway. So on February 1st, 1985, the Sons of Light began to brutalize an inmate named Lincoln Love. Now, Love was a jailhouse lawyer, which is an imprisoned person who is well-versed in the law and often helps other imprisoned people with their legal filings. So you can imagine any white supremacist group would not take kindly to someone helping other imprisoned people with their legal matters. So while Love was handcuffed, the Sons of Light began to beat him and were attempting to kill him. The sight was so horrendous that John Balagoon Cole and Christopher Naeem Trotter felt that they had no choice but to intervene to stop the murder. And despite the prison guards' best efforts, no one lost their life that day. For their heroism, Cole and Trotter were sentenced to 200 plus years between the two of them and are still in prison 40 years later. If not for this documentary, so many people like myself would not know of the Pendleton 2 and the atrocities they still face to this day. Jack not only raises our consciousness through art, he also works with our most oppressed group in this country, incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. I am always proud to call Jack my comrade.
The same goes for me. You know, I'm proud to have Jack as my comrade. And I can think about the first time that we met here at the Indianapolis Liberation Center. You know, we had a meeting because we had wanted to show the Pendleton 2 documentary for so long. So he comes in for a meeting, you know, with me and a couple of the volunteers at the Liberation Center. And I'll never forget, you know, on the way out, he wanted to take a picture in front of the Liberation Center logo. And I was like, so we were there, and I was like, you know, got everybody else in the room. I was like, hey, come on, you know, get in the picture too. And afterwards, Jack was like, you know, that's when I knew this was the right place for me, you know, like, because it's all of us, it's going to take all of us. And that's very much his attitude. You know, it's like, it's about, you know, we don't necessarily always set aside our differences. We work through them, but it's got to take all of us, you know. Absolutely. It's going to take all of us. And he's somebody who can actually like put that into practice because it's easier said than done. So that's it for this episode of Naptown People's Radio. This week, we're asking listeners to partake in a phone zap for Jada Trainor. Trainor is the veteran and the mother who we were talking about earlier. You can go to indyliberationcenter.org and check out the scripts. Give Ryan Mears a call and demand that he drop the bogus charges against Jada. There's also an email that you can fill out that will automatically email all the relevant people at his office. And in addition, we're reminding you all to check out Answer Indiana's membership application and to join. They're starting a new statewide initiative to have a coordinated, centralized, statewide anti-racist and anti-war organization. Sign up at the end of this week. You'll get a welcome package. We did hear from Answer organizer Lindsay Holgrave last episode. She's dope and amazing to work with. I love working with Lindsay and all the Answer Indiana comrades here at the Indianapolis Liberation Center. If you found today's discussion useful, pass it on, leave a comment, and listen for our next episode to drop. The road ahead is long, but we walk it together. Study with your comrades, build with your community, and always remember, theory without action is paralysis, but action without theory is chaos. Once again, I'm your host, Derek Ford, here with my co-host,
Dani Abdullah.
Stay dangerous, stay disciplined, and stay in the struggle.
We trying to create a movement. We got a chance to do something in Indiana that brothers like myself been talking about for the last 40 years. When I first became political and we was organized behind the walls in the 80s and 90s, some of the stuff that we doing now with the different programs and the different institutions that we have and things like the Indy Center is things that we used to talk about and dream about doing. And now we doing them. See what I'm saying? We doing it. And we got to keep that momentum going. And it's also generation. So as the next generation come up, you know what I'm saying, it's on y'all to take it to the next level and take it to the next stage.
Salute.